Periods suck. The negative parts of ADHD suck. What do you get when you add the two together? It's just awful, right? Hello and welcome to Through the Noise Coaching. My name is Lee and I'm a leadership coach specialised in growing the careers of mid to senior neurospices. And with that context, you might be thinking, why is she here today talking about periods of all things? But in order to be a great coach, I actually need to look at the whole person that I'm coaching. And this is particularly pertinent for people that have ADHD and autism, because we just struggle to compartmentalise our lives. Things that are happening at home affect us at work and we can't just put them away in a box. And of course, I'm just really passionate about learning and sharing information about ADHD, and that the more we know about our ADHD, the better self-awareness we have, the better we can move through this world with an understanding of how we work. So with that in mind, I've been diving into this topic so I can better understand how ADHD and periods interact, both for myself and for my viewers. Now, the research in this space is very, very new and there's very little published out there already. Last week we took a look at the only published theoretical framework around ADHD and the monthly cycle. And this week we're going to look at something a little bit different actually. In fact, we're going to look at a paper around people's lived experience with ADHD and monthly cycles. The paper, Perceived Associations Between the Menstrual Cycle and Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder, ADHD, a qualitative interview study exploring lived experiences. It's to both my knowledge and the author's knowledge the only paper like this in existence right now. It's the only paper that exists that is looking at the real experiences of people who menstruate and their interactions with their ADHD, and so is a first step to formalising this world of discussion. In this case, the study interviewed 10 participants online using semi-structured interviews with open-ended questions. The participants were found on Reddit and Instagram between August and October 2022. The mean age was 27 and the mean age of diagnosis was 25 and a half, which actually means that most people as part of this were actually adult diagnosed. All participants were on stimulant medication, so unlike last week, this gives us a bit of an opportunity to look at how stimulant medication reacts with the monthly cycle as well. The participants were also a mixture of women and people who are non-binary, which means that we can actually start exploring some of the lived experiences of people of other genders than just women, which is super rare for this kind of research. Before we go into the results, now is probably a good time to refresh some of the terminology around periods. Last week, a lot of the language was kind of very, very heavily medicalised, and so I actually want to take a lighter approach in this video and try and explain everything in plain English as much as possible. So our menstrual cycle begins on the first day of our period, which is when the uterus sheds its lining and our period begins. This is the first day of what is called the follicular phase, which is a time period between starting our period and ovulation at the end of that period. During this time, our progesterone remains low, but estradiol, which is an estrogen hormone, starts to gradually rise before it spikes up just before ovulation. The day after ovulation, we move into the second half of our cycle. So the estrogen drops after ovulation, and then both estradiol and progesterone tend to rise towards the mid-luteal phase before both dropping together and we begin our next menstruation again. So with an understanding of the basic theory behind it, let's move on to the actual topic of the study. The conversation with participants were grouped into 3 parts, the first being experiences with ADHD and the menstrual cycle. The second is experiences with healthcare providers, and the third is menstrual health management. So we're going to start off by talking about the experiences of ADHD and the menstrual cycle. Now, last week we spoke about some theory behind this that suggests that there are 3 phases. The first being increased hypersensitivity, both emotional and sensory, during the luteal phase, followed by decreased cognitive function and increased suppression around the period and increased reward-seeking behaviour around ovulation. The results of the lived experience broadly line up with ADHD symptoms increasing towards a mid-luteal phase and then again around the period, which broadly lines up with the theory. The participants found that this really impacted their quality of life, their mental well-being, their careers, their goals, their personal relationship. I mean, it just touched every area of their life, which really says to me that this is something we need to start taking seriously. The exact symptoms that became worse were executive function, particularly around task switching and task initiation, emotional dysregulation, that's anxiety, aggression, feelings of hopelessness, sensitivity, irritability, and all that really good stuff. And then also dysregulation in focus, so an inability to focus on tasks and just general forgetfulness. I wanted to share some of the quotes that this paper provides because I think they might resonate with some of you. Here's a few. It's kind of like a regression, and I also procrastinate basic self-care things that aren't very hard to do, like taking a shower. I'm upset over things that aren't in congruence with like my values, so like I get upset over things that I don't actually care about, but it feels very closely related to just like an inability to regulate myself, you know? The point about feeling like a regression is particularly pertinent because I can so empathise with how frustrating that is in your ADHD journey. All the participants were medicated and most of them were engaging in therapy to help manage their ADHD. So this is a group of people that are actively working on trying to improve their ADHD management so the negative impacts don't affect their life so much. And so feeling like they take a setback for a week every month is really, really tough. Some participants would try and restructure their life around the cycle, so making sure they had a lighter load on time periods that were going to be much more difficult. And this is something that I've thought about doing a lot, but I've never actually managed to implement it. And I wonder if this has something to do with my potential autism and a love for routines, meaning it's harder for me to have weeks where I do very different things. I'd kind of love to see some research on the intersection between ADHD and autism here, but given how young a field this is, I think there might be a little way off. I'd also like to acknowledge here that the participants actually spotted this pattern themselves. They linked their fluctuating symptoms with their menstrual cycle without anyone actually telling them about it. And I've actually had the same experience. I noticed a pattern, my partner noticed a pattern, but I noticed it with him, and we discovered that this was linked without a doctor or anyone telling me that this might actually be a possibility, but more on this topic a little bit later. The participants were also able to comment on how their medication interacted with this as well, something that was missing from the theory last week. All the participants were medicated and they found it had a profound positive impact on their life going on the medication, but actually that the effectiveness of their medication just fluctuated with their monthly cycle as well. While they said overall the medication was still working, they noted that the effect in that mid-luteal phase was just minimal and they weren't really getting a huge amount of benefits from it. When asked about it, they didn't really know what to do about it and would like to be better informed in the medication in general and the medication's relationship with periods in specific. The gap in education is clear in this paper's discussion around interaction with healthcare providers where, as I alluded to earlier, no one ever really gets told about this in their diagnosis and doesn't really feel like they can ask questions about it either. In fact, they felt worried that if they brought up this perceived connection between their menstrual cycle and ADHD symptoms, then they would just kind of be dismissed or considered invalidated. And the paper draws on a parallel with endometriosis and how many sufferers actually are just dismissed and told that it's normal pain and it takes years to get diagnosed. So their worries aren't unfounded. In fact, the participants generally found doctors to be either unhelpful or dismissive in general. The quotes that the paper pulls around here are around doctors telling people to just try harder and all the other shameful and patronising stuff that just details a lack of knowledge about ADHD in general, which is really unfortunate. There was one exception. One person was actually told about this during their diagnosis and had a much more positive interaction with it. This does fill me with hope that things might be able to improve. The last topic of the paper was to do with menstrual health management, which is something that I've never really put much time thinking about, but it's a very valid point because the things that we struggle with because of our ADHD symptoms tend to be things like organising, planning and remembering. All of those things that make dealing with a period actually much harder. This leads to people not knowing when their next period is because they can't keep track and therefore having to use, say, menstrual tracking apps in order to keep track of that. They also use the example of one person who forgot to take out the menstrual cup at the end of the period, left it in for too long and got a yeast infection as a result, which does not sound fun. As you can imagine, these led to feelings of shame. We've all been caught out by our period and accidentally stained our clothes, and that's a normal part of learning how to deal with periods, but as an adult you really feel like you should have got over it by this point. So there's a lot of shame attached to making a mistake in menstrual health management as an adult. The next thing the paper said really resonated with me because I talk about this all the time, and it spoke about how much energy and time wasted worrying about menstrual health management, about getting it wrong, that is occupying these people's brains throughout the day. All the stress and the anxiety of making a mistake that's constantly filling our brains. From my experience, worrying about not being good enough at something is just such a fundamental part of the ADHD experience. So there you have it, 2 videos on ADHD and periods that come from 2 different perspectives, but both kind of come to the same conclusion, and that's ADHD and periods is just a unique combination that makes things more difficult than it is for neurotypicals or people who don't menstruate. The open question is, where do we go from here? It's a difficult topic to talk about because of the stigma attached to it. There's still so much stigma attached to ADHD that I sometimes forget about because I spend so much of my time in ADHD circles, but that is something that we're still battling with. Combine that with the taboos around periods that are still not gone away, it's not really surprising that this isn't being spoken about enough. At the same time, it's important for us to be informed and to know of these effects. And I don't know about you, but for me personally, knowing that I'm super emotionally dysregulated because of where I am in my cycle makes it much, much easier to have that self-compassion and actually deal with the emotional dysregulation that I'm feeling. With that in mind, I'm going to leave this here for this week. Please like, comment and subscribe. And if you haven't seen it already, you might be interested in my video, 5 outdated concepts about neurodivergence in the workplace that we need to talk about. Thank you for your attention today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.